Good morning and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue reading A Prophet in Babylon by W.J. Dawson. Today we read Chapter 17, Part A, Olivia's Choice. The leaven of the new movement spread fast, especially among the churches. What at first appeared fantastic and sensational soon proved itself to be a vindication of reason in relation to religion. It was a return to reality, the sudden emergence of the essential and imperishable elements of religion. To multitudes of men, especially those men who composed the younger ministry and membership of the churches, its effect was like the awakening from a dream. What had the ministry been teaching? What had the churches been doing? Both alike had been moving in an unreal world. No wonder church attendance was in decline. The average man felt no need of the church because the church did not understand his need. You can make men believe, but he who believes against his will is worse than an atheist, was one of Gordon's pregnant sayings. It is not doctrines that inspire conduct, but conduct that creates doctrines, was another. Gordon had been saying these things all his life, and had suffered for saying them. They had been hard sayings which only a few elect souls could receive. But he now found that the world had moved after all. His teaching, long neglected and derided, became the gospel of the hour. He became, as Gaunt had prognosticated, the prophet of the movement, and his words were everywhere quoted, commented on, and endorsed. "We have treated Christianity as something to be thought about," he wrote in one of his books, "whereas it is not a system of thought at all, but a code of life. Jesus lives in the eternal memory of the race, not alone by what he taught, but by what he did. Others could have preached the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus alone lived it. To live a virtue is greatly more than to attain the clearest vision of what the virtue is. It needs a diviner inspiration to live one day well than to write a gospel. The only real claim to inspiration which any gospel has is that it can help a single man to live a single day well." Teachings such as these, widely disseminated and backed up by the conspicuous example of the League of Service, were bound to have their effect. But the chief reason for their potency lay, after all, in the ripeness of men's minds to receive them. Gaunt had not judged wrongly when he had announced a universal revolt against the existing church, but behind every revolt there is some ideal of reconstruction. To deny is really to affirm. "Men hate because they love," Gordon wrote. "Hatred is simply love reversed. He who hates a thing because it is bad is already in love with something better. Hatred is the shadow thrown by love." And so, as the great controversy went on, it proved to be. But because hatred must precede love, the immediate effect of the movement was immense dissension. This dissension made itself felt first, as was natural, in the churches, and among the first to feel the ferment was Jordan's. Jordan himself contributed to this effect in no small degree by his vehement denunciation of Gaunt. In this, however, he failed in his usual astuteness, and mistook the temper of his church. He had occupied a position of supremacy for so many years, his authority had been so long unquestioned, that any revolt against that authority seemed incredible, and hence he stubbornly refused to recognize the signs of the times. But as weeks passed, the proofs that his authority over his congregation was weakening became too evident for denial. His geniality forsook him. He became anxious. Sleep failed him, and he grew querulous. And then, to complete his discomfiture, he found the spirit of revolt active in his own household. The Jordan household consisted of a sick wife and 2 children, Robert and Olivia. Robert had long ago left home after a series of bitter quarrels with his father. At 16, Robert had been a high-spirited and lovable boy, with no worse vice than a certain proud impatience of restraint. At 18 he had gone to college, taking with him no better moral ballast than a narrow traditional theology which had never commended itself to his intellect, and had long been repugnant to his heart. A year at college had turned him into a free thinker. His free thinking, at the worst, was but the effervescence of a youthful mind, but with the common vanity of youth he had been proud to parade it as a symbol of liberty. If the boy's father had possessed any real elasticity or sympathy of intellect, no great harm would have been done. But Jordan possessed neither. He did not attempt to argue with his son, he commanded his obedience. He had never known in himself the ferment of a youthful mind, and he could not comprehend it in another. A sympathetic father would have recognized in this ferment the undigested ideas, the signs of a growing intellect. Jordan saw it only as the evidence of a dire apostasy. He refused to let the boy return to college on the grounds that he was responsible for his son's moral safety, and must, therefore, keep the boy under his own eye. Of all courses which he could have taken, this was the unwisest and worst. Cut off from the natural camaraderie of his youth, spied upon and hindered in all his pursuits, left without regular employment, and treated with habitual sarcasm, the boy soon fell into evil courses, less from a liking for evil than a warm detestation of what passed for good in his father's house. The end came suddenly, when one night, coming home late, the boy found his father's door closed against him. The next morning he had disappeared. Inquiries proved vain. He had never since been heard of. Too late, Jordan would have given anything to have opened the door to the boy against whom the door had been locked on that night of anger, but beyond a tightening of the mouth and some fresh lines upon the forehead, Jordan gave no sign of what he felt. The name of Robert was never spoken in his father's presence. It was from that night of the closed door that the mother's sickness began, a sickness beyond the reach of medicine. In the secret forlornness of his heart, Jordan turned for comfort to his daughter. Olivia Jordan, like her brother, was high-spirited, but of a much more docile nature. When Robert left home, she was too young to understand the causes of the disaster, but she recognized the ceaseless, incurable grief of her father, and her heart went out to him. She had shared his confidences, as far as he was capable of imparting them. She had been educated into his view of things, and the mere power of daily continuity had shaped her character into a fashion consonant with her father's habits of thought. She had grown into a beautiful and thoughtful woman, conventionally active in church work, popular among the people, and much loved for her graces of disposition and person. Olivia Jordan had been present at the great meeting in Madison Square Garden, and had been profoundly impressed. It proved the turning point of her history. From that moment she had become her father's unwilling judge. It is a terrible hour for parents when the personality which they have created assumes its own rights, and is no more plastic to their control. That hour had now come for Jordan. Olivia heard in silence her father's public and private criticism of Gaunt. She heard with a divided, and latterly with a discerning mind. She had so long trusted her father's judgment that when she at last reached the point of questioning it, the process of revolt was swift. Night after night, as she lay sleepless, it seemed as though some power, not herself, a power at once acute and malicious, pieced the past together, illuminated it, analyzed and dissected it, and finally combined its elements into dreadful coherence. She realized the treachery of such thoughts, but she could not help herself. Again and again, by an effort of the will, she dismissed them. Always they returned again, like a pain which increases after each interval of postponement. The father whom she had always regarded as wise, she saw now as foolish and misguided. Yet it was not for her to say so. Even though he were 1,000-fold more wrong than he was, yet it was her duty to be silent. But she had no sooner reached this conclusion than the mind ran back like a returning tide, and she felt her silence a worse treachery than the plainest speech could be. She grew pale and thin with constant agitation of her thoughts. Her cheerfulness left her, and she went about her household tasks with leaden feet. For a long time her father had been so absorbed in his own difficulties to notice her dejection, But she knew that the time must come when her secret would be laid bare, and at last it came. On a certain evening Jordan had entertained at his house a number of his clerical friends, who called themselves satirically the S.P. Club, or the Club of Superior Persons. The club met once a month, nominally for the discussion of theological questions, really for the purpose of comradeship. At the dinner table that evening, Gaunt and his doings were the theme of conversation. It was soon apparent that not a single member of the club was friendly to him. He himself and his work was the subject of much humorous derision, but behind the humor there rankled an element of acrid hostility. "He's quite mad," said Jordan. "I saw the signs of it long ago, and warned him. He'll end where most charlatans end, in a madhouse." "If it were only madness," said one of the party. "For my part, I can't stop at that verdict. He has the disastrous sanity of the Antichrist." "Oh, he's sane enough in the ordinary sense, I suppose," retorted Jordan. "He at least knows how to play for popularity." "Father, is that quite fair?" asked Olivia in a voice that trembled. "Why, what do you know about it, my child?" "I may not know all that you know, father, but I am quite sure that Mr. Gaunt is honest." Jordan flushed angrily. "The worst men in history have thought themselves honest," he retorted. "And surely the best, too," she replied in a low voice. There was a long silence, and then Jordan turned the conversation with a laugh. But it was clear that he was both angry and disconcerted. "I think you had better go to your mother, Olivia," he said a moment later. "She may be wanting you." Olivia flushed and left the room. And we'll stop there for this week. Next week we'll continue with Chapter 17, Part B of Olivia's Choice. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.